Welcome to TriTech University. My name is Bill Steppen, and today we're going to explore AIM's touchscreen menu system, how it functions, and how you can customize it to take full advantage of it to maximize your daily productivity. We're going to approach this topic with the mindset that you might be coming in from an older version of AIM, like version 11 or older, but this content is still going to apply for brand new AIM users as well, so don't let that distract you. But as always, if you have any questions regarding today's content as we go, feel free to type that into the questions panel here in GoToWebinar, and I'll do my best to answer those as we go along. We should have some time at the end for a Q&A session for any questions that I didn't get a chance to get to. So let's go ahead and take a look at my screen here. I'm just going to go ahead, switch this over so that everyone can see my screen. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off my webcam for the moment so everyone can focus on that. Now, when we talk about the touchscreen menu system, what we're really kind of talking about is this on-screen menu that you always have access to when you're not in point of sale. Even if you don't have a touchscreen monitor, you can still take advantage of this menu. When you first install and set up AIM, these on-screen buttons essentially mimic your drop-down menus. So if you're coming from an older version, you're going to be very familiar with these drop-down menus. You can see we've got File, Modules, Reports, Maintenance, Admin, and Help. And on screen, we have File, Modules, Reports, Maintenance, Admin, and Help. And you'll notice if I look at the File menu, for example, we have Point of Sale, Workstations, Quick Sale, etc. If I click into this File menu, you can see it's the same exact setup. So out of the starting gate, these on-screen buttons mimic your drop-down menus. And really at that point, it's no different using these drop-downs than it would be using these on-screen buttons. Now, in addition to what I'm going to call these normal menus, there are also some elements that are always on screen. You might notice that no matter if I click into File or Modules and then go down a level there, or if I go back to the Home button and go into Maintenance, you can see that these two buttons up here are always there, along with basically the label of where we're at with kind of a breadcrumbs trail, as well as these four buttons over here on the side. And we're going to talk about how this all works. So keep that in mind as we take a look at setting up these menus. The whole idea with customizing these is that as you get an idea for your day-to-day workflow, you can, at a basic concept, you can take all of the functions that you normally do, whether that's, let's say, receiving purchase orders or entering in AP invoices or running various reports. Obviously, those all have buttons in their respective menus, but you could copy those functions and put them all on this main menu so that basically you have immediate access at the click of a button, literally, to get all of those things that you would normally spend time. And obviously we're talking about time, and every time you click on a menu, you take some time, or sometimes it's hard to remember exactly where those functions are. So you can put all those functions on this main screen. You also have the ability to set up multiple, what we'll call main menus for your individual employees or for certain workstations, so that when an employee logs in, if they've got their own, what we'll call home menu, their functions are front and center. Or if you've got a specific, let's say a back office computer that's meant for receiving inventory, no matter who logs into it, those receiving inventory and various reports will be front and center without having to navigate through that. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions on that, let me know. The way that you customize these menus is found in, unsurprisingly, the maintenance portion of the program. So if we go into the maintenance menu and then go from there into the general maintenance menu, you're going to find two functions, touchscreen menus and point of sale menus. We're going to look at point of sale menus specifically next week. But what we're going to look at today is touchscreen menus. And if it helps to think of it, instead of thinking of this as touchscreen menus, you could think of this as back office menus, because typically what we're talking about outside of a point of sale is back office type functions. So let's go ahead, open up the touchscreen menu editor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to maximize this window just to make it nice and easy to see. I'm going to point out some of the on-screen features so that you can start to get acquainted with them. On the right-hand side is basically our control panel. On this control panel is a layout of all of the menus that make up your menu system. You can see right now we're highlighted on this main menu, and that's what we're seeing over to the left in the workspace area, so to speak. Now, in addition to the listing of menus, there's the menu details that were highlighted on right here. Below that is a kind of a dark gray space where we have functions for adding from scratch buttons and images and labels and all kinds of things. At the very bottom, we have buttons for either generating a brand new menu system, deleting the menu system that we're in right now, exporting this out to an Excel spreadsheet, or importing one back in that we've previously exported. Now, if you're working on this on a smaller monitor, there may be times when the functions that you're working on are behind this control panel, and that's where this swap sides button can be really handy. You'll notice if I click on this, it simply jumps this menu over to the left-hand side of the screen, and now I have full access to any buttons or functions that were hidden behind that menu previously. And then I can click over here to swap it back over. You'll notice as I click through these different menus, I'm seeing those respective setups on the workspace area. And basically this is how I can go from one menu to another. The contains function up here where I can click right into this gray space below the description column header is a great spot to do some filter searches. So say, for example, I want to get to the, I want to quickly get to, let's say, the admin menu. I can just click right into there and I can start typing in admin, and you'll notice that it really drills down to anything that has the word admin in it. So this way I can just click right there, and now I'm to my admin menu without having to have scrolled through this entire list. So keep that in mind. It's a great way to be able to find things quickly. Another thing that you can do is you can right click right on a given button, and if it's a button that normally would move you from one menu to another, you'll notice there is an option to jump to that menu. So that's another way of getting from one menu to another. I can right click and say jump to menu. You'll notice that it takes me to that reports menu that I had right clicked on. Just be cognizant that you can't simply just left click on a button anywhere on these menu editors because it is an editor. It's not the actual menu itself. So left clicking on it does nothing. In fact, left clicking is how you would either drag a button around or do other things like that. So I'm just going to cancel that for the moment. So keep that in mind. This is kind of just some basic ideas of using this menu editor. Now, one other thing I want to point out, this is a common structure of these menus. I'm going to go ahead and bring this back up so I can kind of find my main menu. You'll notice that in addition to the main menu, there is what's called a main overlay. And the overlay is elements of the screen that are going to be on screen all the time. What do I mean by that? Well, remember how when I was going from one menu to another, I was clicking into modules or maintenance and menus down from there, but those green buttons were always on screen? Rather than having to put those home and back buttons on every individual menu, they can be on what's called an overlay. So you'll notice there's a main overlay here. If I click onto that, the only things that are left on screen are the green buttons, the tokens for for naming things, as well as these green divider bars, as well as, I should point out, the background. Every menu can have a background. You'll notice while I'm here on this main overlay, the background area here, the image button is in bold. And that means that this image is attached to this overlay. I'm just going to right click and cancel out of that. I can have individual images on specific menus, and that would override any image that's on the overlay. But if you want to have, let's say, your store logo on every screen, regardless of what menu you're on, you'll want to go to the main overlay and then click into that image option. It will pop up whatever current image is in the background of your menu. You can then right click on that and you can change the image to the image of your choice. You also have options of just clearing out entirely, taking a look at where that image path is, ultimately either saving your changes or canceling and reverting back to where you started. So that's what we're going to do for now. So that is one thing you'll want to be, again, cognizant of. Now, if you want to create a menu overlay of your own, feel free to do so. I'm going to talk about creating menus from scratch here in just a minute. The main thing that implies that this is an overlay is the overlay option here. You can see how this says this is always an overlay. When we get to point of sale menus next week, there's going to be way more overlay options. But in the case of these touchscreen or back office menus, it's either an overlay or it isn't. You'll notice when I click on any other menu, these are always not an overlay. And the main overlay is always an overlay. So that's kind of the idea with that. Now, the way all these menus get grouped together is via a menu system. You start off with a default menu system to get you started. And if you would like to leave this one as is and create one from scratch, or if you'd like to have different menu systems, either for different computers or for different employees, that's where you can generate a new menu system. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and you'll see it will ask me for a new menu system. I'm going to call this administrative, and I could use this menu system to give to anyone who I would consider to be an administrator in the system. You'll notice when I click OK, what it will do is, after generating it, those will be over here on this menu listing. It'll also then say, would you like to assign this as default menus for all of your workstations? I'm going to say no to that for the moment, but we'll talk about that, what that means in just a few moments. So you'll see there, once again, I'm seeing now essentially two copies of each menu here, the main overlay for the default menus and the main overlay for the administrative menu. I'm going to sort this by the menu system now instead of by the description, just so that we can kind of keep this drilled down. But that's basically the whole idea of a menu system, is it's a way to group multiple menus together. Let's focus just on the default menus for now, so I don't get too confused. You can see I could just type right into that contains box, and now I don't have to worry about the administrative menus popping up. Let's go back to this main menu, and let's take a look at some of these right-click functions on a button, because every menu is going to have at least one or more buttons, and that's how you interact with a menu. If I right-click on the File menu here, the File button, every button has a function. I'm going to take a look at this Set Change Function button, and this brings up a menu setup screen. Now, if this is a little bit hard to see, there are functions within GoToWebinar where you can kind of zoom in on my screen, make it a little bit easier to see. But every button has what's called a type, and the type controls what the button ultimately does. Now, for the most part, when you're getting started, you're going to have only a handful of certain button types. A jump button, which lets you jump from one menu to another. You also have jump back and jump home, and that's what these two buttons up here do respectively. This is a jump back button. This is a jump home button. This is a jump button, and you'll notice when you select jump, it will ask you, what menu should this jump to? So from there, you can say, okay, I'm going to point this to a given menu. Of course, I'm seeing this in duplicate because it's actually kind of showing me both menu systems right now. But that's basically how you can jump from one menu to another. Whatever's in the caption is what will actually print on the button itself. So I just kind of want to give you this general overlay of this setup screen before we get into the different button types. In certain circumstances, there may be a security option, and this allows you to make sure that whatever security permissions you're setting up are going to apply this to this button, so that way if certain people, certain employees need to be locked out of these functions, if their security clearance does not permit access to this function, that button will simply be hidden. It will not show up at all. Alternatively, if their security clearance doesn't allow it, but you would still like to occasionally allow them an override into that menu, you can checkmark the option to allow a security override. If this is checkmarked and the employee normally would not have access to that button, instead of it being hidden, the button will be there, but if they try to click onto it, it'll come up and say you do not have permission, and it will give you an opportunity to have a supervisor or someone who has access to that certain clearance, the ability to come over, put in their username and password, and override that on a case-by-case basis. So again, I just want to make sure these core functions make sense. If there's any questions, let me know. Getting back to the button type, apart from there being jump menus, the other types of buttons that you'll see most commonly, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go into one of these menus. Let's go into the file menu. So I'll just right click and say jump to that menu. And let's take a look at this point of sale button. So I'm going to right click on that, go to the set change function, and you'll see another common button type is what we call a launch form option. A form is basically, if you want to think of it this way, a little mini program within AIM. It's a screen that comes up and allows you to do certain things. In essence, every one of those drop-down menu options is a form. So in this case, this is pointing to the form file point of sale. And just for giggles, if I kind of minimize this a little bit, that would be the equivalent of going to file and point of sale. It's basically what that is. When we talk about a form, it's pretty much anything on these drop-downs that isn't a menu. The exception to that rule would be in the reports menu, where these are reports instead of forms. And we'll see that in action if I go to the reports, any of these reports menus, and you'll notice if I right click on this button and set or change its function, this is specifically a launch report. So those are kind of the three most common button types you'll see. Other types are a none, which basically the button is there purely for the look of the screen. You may, as you set up buttons from scratch, you may assign them a button type of none so that you can then go back and give them a function later. You also have the option of printing a Word document directly. There is another option of showing a keyboard. So if you are at a computer that in most cases doesn't have an actual physical keyboard, like you're actually at a touchscreen point of sale terminal and you need the ability to bring up an on-screen keyboard at a moment's notice, the option of showing a keyboard can be really handy to have as a button. You'll notice there's no additional functions with it. It simply is a button that when you click on it, it'll bring up a keyboard. With the print Word document, you'll have the ability to point this to the Word document of your choice. We'll talk more about Word documents in another webinar entirely. The last option here that I do want to kind of talk about is this open file or URL. This is where a lot of AIM's power can really come into play as far as having on-screen things that you need access to. Say, for example, you want to have a quick link to your store's website, but you don't necessarily want your employees kind of messing around just on the web in general. You can have a direct link to your website right here, and that will take them right to it. Maybe you have an alternative program somewhere on your computer, like maybe an Excel spreadsheet or something else that you, again, want to have a quick link to right here on the screen. You can point it right to that file path and it'll take you right to that file and open it up on your computer. So you could go completely crazy. And if you've got, like, let's say, no endorsement here, but let's say you've got a Jimmy John's account, you've got a local Jimmy John's sub shop down the street, and you just want to have a button there that they send you your sub order. You click that, and if you've got like a quick order set up on your Jimmy John's account, boom, you click a button and you've got a sub sandwich on the way. So the sky's the limit when it comes to this button setup, and it comes to this open file / URL function. Let me know if there's any questions on what we mean again by the button type. Basically, depending on whatever type you choose, there will be options below that. You simply just kind of follow the bouncing ball, make your selections, and ultimately that will help you to build your menus. Now, as far as like the shape and size of the buttons, you can see that for the most part, we're kind of sticking to this kind of squared circle or rounded rectangle type buttons. Out of the starting gate, these light blue colored buttons are always going to launch a form or a report. And if we go back to one of these other main menus, these darker or teal colored buttons typically will take you to other buttons, but maybe you don't like that colorization. Maybe you'd like to modify that. Well, you can right click, and there are options for color setup or shape setup or all different kinds of things. So I could come in here, let's say I want to change the color of this button to something else entirely. You can get really kind of crazy with different kinds of gradient styles and multiple color combinations, but at a bare minimum, if you just want to change the color of this button, color 1 is always the color that's being used primarily. So we can click the little ellipses button there and then go find a different color. Let's say we kind of like this, more of like this, I don't know, other blue. I'll say okay on that. It'll give you a sample of what that would look like. We'll hit okay, and you'll see it now has a different color. Now, obviously it changed to just that one button, and each button is its own individual entity. But if you want to make sure you get that same color for all these other buttons, you can right click and copy that button. You can then right click on a different button and you can paste that button's style. And you'll notice when I do that, it's basically pasting that color as well as if there were any other changes I made to like the font or anything else like that to the button. So that way you can make sure that your buttons are uniform as far as their color setup. If you want to resize a button, oh, before I get to resizing, other options for the shapes of the buttons are as follows. You can see there's button shapes here. Probably the most common ones are rectangles and rounded rectangles. You can see a rectangle is simply just that, as opposed to having the rounded corners. There's also basically circles or ellipses if it's not an exact circle. Diamonds, stars, hearts. We don't have the purple horseshoes or anything like that. This is not your Lucky Charms bowl, but those are your options there. Now, as far as basically the size of it, you can resize these buttons in one of two ways. And then probably the most straightforward way is to hold down the Control key on your keyboard. You can see down here in really tiny text, you probably actually can't see it at all, but it says in fine print, Control click and drag to resize a button. So if I hold down the Control key and then left click and drag, I can basically make this button any size I want. So that's kind of the idea with that. Now, in the time that I have here, I do want to talk a little bit about some strategies for making your menu systems the most efficient out of the starting gate. And then there's all kinds of extra detail that we could go into in future sessions. But let's say that you want to have the option of adding and changing your inventory right on the main screen. So I'm going to go to that menu. I'm going to right click, and instead of copying the button, which I could do if I wanted just that one button, but I'm going to say multi-copy. I'm going to multi-copy the add inventory, multi-copy the change, and multi-copy the receive. I am then going to go back to the main menu. There we go. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to multi-paste. And you can see it basically takes those buttons and puts them here on the main menu. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now if I close out of the editor and go back to the main screen, there are my 3 buttons right there on the main menu. You can use this idea to customize this or any other menu. There are certainly options in there to delete out buttons that you just find are not worth anything to you at all, like if there are certain functions, let's say in the modules menu, maybe you have nothing to do with long-term contracts. So you could just right-click and delete that button, and the button goes away. And you never have to worry about it cluttering up your screen. You've got more room now for other buttons. So you can customize it that way. Another thing that you can do is if I click the Add button here, I can create individual custom menus. So let's call this Bills menu. I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to go ahead and let's just take one of these other buttons here. I'm just going to, since we're kind of running short on my time here, I'm just going to grab one button, go back to Bills menu, and paste that there. And now let's talk a little bit about where you can assign home menus for your computers and your employees. So hopefully this is all making sense. Again, let me know if it's not, but you have the ability to now assign these menus as what we call home menus for both your workstations. If we go into the general maintenance menu and go to workstations, every computer is a workstation. You can kind of see I'm on workstation 1 up here, and there's my workstation 1. Here on the home menu, this is pointing to the main menu. Now, let's say I wanted this particular computer, and I'm not going to do it on this one, but let's say if I'm on workstation 2, let's say this is something more of an administrative computer. I can come here, and instead of pointing this to the default menu, main menu, I could go to the administrative section and then go to the administrative main menu. And then that way it'll know to stay in that administrative menu structure on workstation 2. I would of course want to make sure I do the same thing for the default toolbar. The toolbar, I didn't get into it, but that's basically these 4 buttons over here. So it is its own little mini menu, if you will. That's one way of customizing which menus are going to be used when you log into that computer. But as an override, you can also do the same thing for your employees. So if we take a look into the administrative menu, take a look at employees and security, and then go into the employee option for any given employee, and this popped up over on my other monitor, I can come in here, and of course I'm just the default employee right now, but let's pretend that this was someone individually. So like, let's say this was me, and I wanted to have it open up to my home menu. I can go to the menu here, the menu tab, and for the home menu, I can go ahead and find that menu that I have labeled as the default menu for Bills menus. There it was right there. There are other overrides here for the point of sale type stuff. Again, we'll talk about that next week. But now if I save that, of course, it needs a default location. Let's just grab that quick. So now what I want you to notice is when I log out and log back in, so that's the no sale, let's log out, bring this over here, log in as that user. Try that once more. There we go. You can see that it's now starting on Bills menu because that is the default home menu that I set for the default employee. So basically, no matter now, if I were to go to workstation 2 or any other workstation and log in as this user, that is going to be the menu that starts out. And then of course, from there, I technically would only have, of course, I could use the drop downs up here, but basically that would be how I could set up those buttons for the things that I use the most. So hopefully that makes sense as far as how these menus work here for the getting around with the touchscreen menus. Next week, like I said, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into the point of sale menu structure. So I encourage you to, in your own test copies here, feel free to play around with those and get to kind of used to copying and pasting buttons. You can have all kinds of fun with setting up your menus. And if you make it fun, then, well, outside of just enjoying your work, interfacing with AIM can become a much greater joy on a day-to-day basis. So it also helps you to encourage usage of the program for those that maybe are a little put off by computers. Maybe they're more of an old school crowd that don't really find users all that familiar. So that's basically the whole idea behind that. You can make it much more friendly and open to use to some of your staff, especially those who, like I said, are maybe off put by computers. Jessica does have a question. How did you get to the default employee screen? Let me just go ahead and bring that back up here. So once again, back to the screen here. The default employee is who I'm logged in as right now, and that is what I set up here at the employee level. So in the admin and employee security employee program, or form, if you will, you can grab any employee that you want to set up a default menu for, go to the menu tab here, and point it to their home menu. Now, if I clear this and exit back out and then re-log in with that same username and password, you'll notice this reverts back to the main menu because that is the setting in the workstation settings, maintenance, general, and workstations for this given workstation. This is pointing to the main menu. If I point this to, let's say, the maintenance menu for whatever reason, and now I log out and log back in, you will see that it's now starting me off in the maintenance menu as my home menu. So just kind of keep that in mind, as that is how that really works as far as what these home menus are implying there. So thank you so much for the question, Jessica. Noel is asking a question. Do version 11 hotkeys still work? In other words, the Alt key options. And in some cases they do. For example, like you can see when I hover over into the file menu, some of those most common ones like F5 for point of sale, F11 for workstation info, F7 for no sale, those all still work no problem. You will also notice that with these buttons, some of the letters are underlined. And so you can do that same thing. You can hold down the Alt key, and if I hold down Alt and hit C, you can see how this is going to the customer menu. So that takes me into maintenance and customer. And then if I go to Alt C again, this would take me into customer defaults. So you can definitely still use those. They may not be exactly the same as you're used to in version 11. Now I want to point out, this is a function of the menu itself, the button. So let me just really quick go back into the touchscreen menu editor. And you can, if you're setting up your own custom buttons, you can specify which letter is the Alt shortcut key for your keyboard. I'm going to right click and look at the function here, and notice how for the customer menu, it's not simply just customer. There's an ampersand before the C. If I go to the Active E menu, there is an ampersand below the lowercase v. So basically, whatever letter you want to have be the keyboard shortcut, you can put an ampersand before it. It won't display the ampersand, but it will underline the letter directly following that ampersand. And on your keyboard, it's the Shift 7 key on most keyboards is where you'll find that ampersand. So that'd be how you can customize which button or which keyboard key is the shortcut key with the Alt functionality. So thank you so much for that question, Noel. Dennis is asking, what does the workstation setting force all AIM windows to stay within the main form if possible do? Nice mouthful there. Yes, thank you, Dennis. So back in the workstation settings, and this actually kind of applies to what I'm doing here. I have multiple monitors. This really is only useful if you have multiple monitors. Notice how I do not have this check marked. If this is check marked, then basically it's going to force any of these screens to stay within the confines of the main AIM window. Because in version 12, you can have windows any which way. In version 11, for those of you who aren't familiar with the older version, it basically was its own self-contained window, and everything, the little mini forms, if you will, were confined to staying within the main AIM window. And that's not the case with version 12. You could have this menu here be anywhere you wanted to, and it doesn't even have to be full screen. It could be its own separate little floating menu, if you will. But that's the whole idea with that, Dennis, is if that's checkmarked, it's not going to let you have these windows floating any which place. It's going to keep it within its own AIM main window, if that makes sense. So hopefully it does. But that's basically the concept there with the menus, and that is apropos since it does kind of talk a little bit about menu structure in general. So that being said, hopefully this is all making sense. And I'm sure I'll see many of you next week at the point of sale side of this equation, where it'll be very similar to what we talked about this week, but there are going to be some unique and very specific elements when it comes to the point of sale structure. So definitely join us for that. If you have any questions between then and now, definitely drop me a line. You can email me at training@tritechretail.com, which should be the same email where you got the notification to join today's session. You can check out the recording, as always, on our TriTech University page in the member portal. And if there's anything else, just give us a call. Be more than happy to help out any way that we can. That's all for today. Thank you so much for attending, and we will see you next week. Take care.